Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. Book review. I've already done Crime and Punishment. This is yet another infamous epic Russian novel. Now, I suppose most people tend to kind of group all these 19th century epic Russian novels together. So for me, I tend to associate Anna Karenina in the same category as Crime and Punishment. I know that's not supposed to be right. I mean, I know that Tolstoy and Dostoevsky were on like polar opposites politically, but the structure of the novels seems similar to me, and my reaction to the novels, both novels, was pretty similar as well. So Anna Karenina, if you had to boil it down, the plot is often described as the story of a married woman caught in an adulterous affair. But that's just like saying the plot of Crime and Punishment is simply a student who commits murder. You hear that and you think, wow, how can you get 1,000 pages out of that? These books must be pretty boring. And then, this is true of both books, once you start reading, you find that there are a lot of subplots. You also find, that I think this is true of both books, that despite occurring over 100 years ago, and despite occurring in a completely different continent, both books seem so true to human nature. A testimony to kind of how little human nature changes across time and across cultural boundaries. Both books, I found myself thinking like, these characters sound like people I know in real life. The thought processes of the characters sound like my own thought processes. You know, the way I justify actions to myself seems to be the way the characters justify their actions to themselves. Actually, I take it back. That's not equally true of both books. I think that's more true of Tolstoy. He has a better idea of kind of the inner monologue of characters. But in both cases, just when I was kind of starting to get into the story and think, hey, these epic Russian classics aren't so bad after all, around about 20 or 30 pages into the book, then you realize kind of all the forward momentum of the plot is done. The story isn't going anywhere for a while, and instead what you have is another 400 or 500 pages of the characters just thinking over what they want to do or discussing the situation with each other. And if you're like me, somewhere around this point you start to lose your patience. And you say, oh, for the love of Pete, can we just get to the end of this story already? But that's just me. Maybe you are a little more sophisticated. I guess the thing with these kind of Russian novels is you don't read them for the plot. You read them more for the philosophy contained inside. And if you're a deep thinker, and if you have an appreciation for philosophy, you'll do fine. If you're like me, and you start to get antsy when you get through 100 pages and there's no big developments in the plot, then this book isn't for you. Now, as most people already know, this is a story of a married woman who falls in love with another man and has an affair. Although, as I mentioned before, there are several subplots. Thematically, Tolstoy uses some of these subplots to set up alternative examples of marriages. But he also uses these subplots to show how one adulterous affair between two people has kind of a ripple effect outwards throughout the whole community and affects the lives of many other people. The affair results in multiple tragedies. Although it is unclear, or at the very least it's unclear to me, if Tolstoy is criticizing the selfishness of this adulterous couple, or if he's criticizing the strict social customs and rules at the time which made this kind of one possibly harmless affair turn into such a big deal. Or I don't know, maybe it's a little bit of both. Since this novel was written in the 19th century, during a period of great upheaval in Russia and Europe in general. There are also a lot of questions throughout the novel about economic class and the relationship of landowners to the peasants. And you can imagine these must have been big burning questions at the time the novel comes out. The time the novel came out. It must have been. Every 19th century Russian novel I've read seems to deal with these questions in some way, so they must have been huge issues. As a history geek, I find this kind of interesting. But it is just historical interest now. It kind of has little relevance to the social questions of nowadays. Yeah, that's pretty much the end. By the way, this is part of my scripted review series, which means I'm going back and reading old reviews that I wrote a long time ago. This review is from 2006. It's sometimes interesting to go back and reread stuff you've written and see how your opinions have changed. In this respect, a couple things. First of all, the biggest thing is I do not remember this book at all. Now, and granted, it has been 12 years, but when I go through my archives, usually I do have kind of some memory of the reading experience, even if it was 20 years ago or 12 years ago or something like that. There's only really a couple books I can't remember at all, and this is one of them. And I think maybe it's partly because I did this as an audiobook. And I don't know, we can debate the pros and cons in audiobooks, but I think I tend to, some stories I didn't absorb well enough on audiobooks. So, you know, I've got this list of classic books I'm trying to kind of read so I can someday tell myself I'm a well-read person. But at some point, there are probably some classic books I need to reread. And Anna Karenina is right at the top of that list of kind of classic books I need to reread, because I just, I don't remember it at all, and I feel like doing it an audiobook was kind of cheating, and I feel like I didn't absorb it. The other thing is, after Anna Karenina, I went ahead and read War and Peace. War and Peace I actually did both. I read it physically, whatever the opposite of audiobook is. I read it. And then after I read it, I listened to it on audiobook as a second time. And War and Peace, I really loved. I was so impressed by the portraits that Tolstoy was able to draw of these characters. And it has made me think that I probably didn't give Anna Karenina its due. That I probably just gave it a casual listen on audiobook, didn't have time to kind of absorb it, and then just kind of dashed out this book review. So, as always, take my opinion with a grain of salt. One of these days, I'm due to reread Anna Karenina at some point.